On the morning of June 10, 1991, the air in South Lake Tahoe was so crisp it still carried a faint scent of melting snow from the distant peaks. On the small slope leading down to the school bus stop, Jaycee Lee Dugard, just 11 years old, walked with a quiet rhythm, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the seams of her worn purple backpack. Behind her, her stepfather, Carl, stood at the doorway of their home, watching her little figure disappear into the blinding California sunlight. Jaycee slowed as she reached the bend in the road where the white picket fence had long since collapsed in a jagged gap, a place where squirrels often darted across. But there were no squirrels this morning. Only a silver-gray van, parked at an angle on the shoulder. The passenger side window was cracked open just enough to reveal a man, salt and pepper hair under a ball cap, staring. Jaycee glanced at him but kept walking, uneasy under his gaze. When she passed the front of the van, the passenger door swung open. The man lunged out, seizing her arm. Jaycee gasped, but his hand clamped over her mouth, and in one brutal motion he yanked her inside. Her backpack fell to the pavement, the zipper splitting open, notebooks scattering like leaves across the asphalt. Carl had barely reached the gate when the van's tires screamed against the pavement, and it sped away, leaving nothing but a cloud of dust and stunned silence in its wake. In that instant, South Lake Tahoe stayed golden and serene, but Jaycee's world and her family's collapsed without warning. In the back seat, Jaycee lay pinned, her hands bound, her mouth taped shut, wide eyes staring at the narrow window as the endless forest began to blur by outside, as though it was swallowing her whole. The road into Antioch, California stretched under the harsh sun like a silver ribbon winding through fields of withered yellow grass. Inside the van, Jaycee curled up, her small hands trembling where the rope bit into her wrists. The smell of cracked vinyl mixed with the acrid scent of tape over her mouth, making her stomach churn. When the van turned off the main road, jostling down a narrow dirt path, she heard the man at the wheel chuckle softly. "Almost there," he murmured to no one in particular. The woman in the passenger seat glanced at Jaycee in the rearview mirror, her eyes cold, devoid of even a flicker of pity. Finally, the van stopped in front of what seemed to be an ordinary single-story house, no different from the rest of the Antioch suburb, but behind it, hidden beyond leaning wooden fences, lay a maze of tarps, sheds, and a low doorway leading underground. Jaycee was dragged out, her legs stumbling over the hot gravel, her mind spinning with fear. The man leaned down and hissed in her ear, "If you scream, no one's ever going to find you." He pulled back the heavy blue tarp, revealing a narrow black opening. Beneath it was a tiny room, its plywood walls damp and musty. In the corner sat a flimsy folding cot, sagging in the middle, next to a stack of dusty canned goods. By the cot's leg lay a faded rag doll, its stitched smile crooked, its fabric face worn thin. Jaycee was shoved inside, the door slamming shut behind her, the dry metallic click of the bolts sealing her fate. In the dim half-light, she backed into the corner, hugging her knees, her heart hammering.
Above her, sunlight still batted the backyard.
Neighbors still watered their flowers. Children still rode their bikes on the street. No one knew that, right here in this quiet neighborhood, an 11-year-old girl had just been erased from the world, and locked away in a tiny room she would later call the second door. The first day in the dark underground room was an unending nightmare. Jaycee lay curled up on the rickety cot, surrounded by the smell of dust and damp wood, while the faint sound of insects gnawing on beams ticked like a clock counting down the seconds. Above her head, footsteps echoed faintly through the plywood ceiling, muffled whispers from the man and the woman drifted down. Sometimes the heavy steel bolt would scrape, chains would drag across the cement floor, and then, silence again, as if the whole world had forgotten she existed. 1 day. 2 days. Jaycee lost all sense of time. She could only tell morning from night by the faint narrow slit of light that occasionally streaked through a vent near the ceiling. On the morning of the 3rd day, the door opened. The woman, Nancy, set down a plate of cold eggs, a plastic cup of water, and a slip of paper. On it were scribbled a few words: "Write your name, age, and what you remember about that day. If you're good, you'll get more to eat." Jaycee took the pencil, her hands trembling, and slowly wrote. Jaycee Lee Dugard. 11 years old. I want to go home. I miss my mom. When Nancy returned, she glanced at the note and smirked. Good. If you want your mom, you have to be good. Listen to him, learn, don't scream. Understand? Jaycee nodded, tears wetting her pillow. From that day forward, alongside her meager meals, she was given a thin notebook, its cover stamped with a crooked label, curriculum. Simple math exercises. Copying short passages over and over. Empty boxes for self-scored marks. At the bottom of every page was a scrawled line: good girls get rewarded. Bad girls get punished. At night, Jaycee would hear the heavy door creak, a flashlight beam cutting through the dark. Philip Garrido would descend, his eyes glinting like a predator. He'd stroke her hair, smiling, "You were good today. Tomorrow you'll get candy." Then he'd vanish back upstairs, leaving the room steeped in fear, dust, and the cold shiver running down her spine. On the 17th day, Jaycee opened her notebook and wrote, her letters shaky, "I promise I'll be good. I promise I'll learn. Please let me see my mom." But instead of her mother, the man returned with his crooked smile and a curt reply, "Your mom isn't here anymore. There's only me now." In that tiny windowless room, Jaycee slowly learned the first lesson in his curriculum. When she was good, she was allowed to live. When she wasn't, she had nothing. Time slipped away, and Jaycee stopped counting days and nights. That dark little room became her only world. On the pages of her curriculum notebook, her handwriting grew steadier, the math problems stopped having mistakes, and her copied passages no longer wavered. At the bottom of each page, she graded herself, 10 out of 10, sometimes adding a tiny star as a quiet promise to herself. Every time she got it right, Garrido would toss her a candy bar, an old book, or simply say, "Good girl." And so, Jaycee began to believe that learning and obedience were her only paths out of that basement. By the end of the first year, she no longer asked about her mother. She called Garrido Daddy now, and Nancy Mom. Every night before falling asleep, she murmured the same phrase, "Tomorrow I'll be even better." By her third year, Jaycee was nearly 14. The basement had been expanded, connecting to a hidden tarp-covered compound in the backyard. Garrido set up tables, chairs, stacks of battered textbooks, even certificates tacked to the plywood walls, a grotesque little classroom in hell. Jaycee was given a strict schedule, hour by hour, biology, math, reading. Each test came with either a reward or a punishment. On bad days, she'd have to lie in the dark for hours without food. One day, Garrido handed her a new hardcover notebook, the label on the front reading, "Self-Evaluation Log." He tapped the first page and said, "From now on, you grade yourself. You have to learn to be honest." On the first page, Jaycee wrote, "October 6th, I was good. I studied well. I deserve to eat.
I deserve to live."
Those words, though written in her own hand, felt like they came from someone else. The little girl with hair dancing in the sun was fading away. One night, Garrido descended with an old biology book and spoke with pride in his voice, "You'll be better than all the others. You'll get into college early." Jaycee pressed her lips together, touched the worn cover of the book, and nodded quietly, "I promise I won't disappoint you." Her eyes in that moment, calm, resigned, and haunting, revealed the cruelest lesson Garrido had taught her, that in hell, the only way to survive was to become his perfect student. The months and years slipped by. Jaycee grew up in that basement, turning 18, then 20. The little girl was now a young woman, her hair long down her back, her eyes hollow like a drained lake. She bore 2 daughters in that makeshift compound, children who had never known sunlight, who also called Garrido Daddy, and called Jaycee Mom. Outside, it seemed the world had forgotten. The abduction of Jaycee Lee Dugard in 1991 faded into the archives of California law enforcement, her case file buried and marked presumed deceased. But then, the cracks began to show.
In Auguste 2009, Philippe Garrido Sudenly brookte Jaycee and the 2 girls tous parole office in Concord, California.
He claimed he needed permission to host a religious event at a local school. Parole officer Allison Curtin, used to eccentric ex-cons, immediately noticed something wrong. She saw a disheveled man rambling about God's mission, flanked by 2 pale, timid young girls. But what truly chilled her was the woman behind him, thin, withdrawn, protective arms wrapped around the girls as if afraid they'd be taken from her.
"What is your name?"
Allison asked. The woman froze, her lips tightening. After a long moment, her voice wavered. "Jaycee."
Jaycee Dugard.
Allison went still. The name slammed into her mind like a siren. This woman, gaunt, colorless, with no trace of childhood left in her face, was the same little girl who'd vanished more than 18 years earlier. That very afternoon, FBI agents and California police swarmed the Antioch property. They cut through tarps, tore down wooden barriers, pried open every narrow door that led into the dark. Under the harsh lights of the forensic team, they saw everything: Jaycee's curriculum notebooks, crude, childlike drawings, a dust-covered doll lying forgotten, and scrawled in chalk in one corner, "I was good." Jaycee, now 29, sat on the edge of an ambulance step, both her daughters in her arms, eyes closed, lips moving silently. She didn't cry, she simply exhaled, as if someone had finally opened her door after 18 years. Outside that basement, the California sun still blazed bright, just like it had the day she was taken. But this time, Jaycee was no longer the little girl swallowed by the light. This time, she had been seen. 3 months after her rescue, the Contra Costa County Courthouse opened the trial of Philip and Nancy Garrido. Both Antioch and South Lake Tahoe were buzzing with media frenzy. Reporters crowded the courthouse steps, flashes popping like a snowstorm, banners reading "Welcome Home Jaycee" draped along the fences. Jaycee didn't sit in the public gallery. She was escorted through a side door, her long brown hair falling across half her face, clutching a battered hardcover notebook to her chest, still grating herself inside, a habit she hadn't yet shaken. When Philip Garrido entered, his orange jumpsuit wrinkled, his eyes still gleaming with madness, he scanned the room and for a brief moment met Jaycee's gaze. She didn't lower her eyes. She didn't look away. For the first time, her calm, steady stare made him the one who flinched. The prosecutor read each charge, voice sharp: kidnapping, rape, false imprisonment, child abuse. Throughout the hearing, Jaycee's curriculum notebooks were presented as evidence. Every small handwriting stroke, every star she'd awarded herself, silent cries for help spanning nearly 2 decades. Jaycee didn't testify in person, but the letter she sent the court was read aloud. "I learned to survive because I had no choice. But now I choose to live. No matter what he took from me, he can't take away the fact that I'm still here." When the letter finished, the room was silent, save for pen scribbling and the faint sound of Jaycee breathing. In the end, Philip Garrido was sentenced to life without parole. Nancy received 36 years. When the courtroom doors finally closed, Jaycee sat quietly on a bench outside, fingers brushing the cover of her old notebook. Inside, she had written a new line.
Today, I am free. I deserve to live.
I am here. The next day, Jaycee returned to South Lake Tahoe for the first time in 18 years. As the car turned onto the familiar road, she saw the mountains in the distance, their snow-dusted peaks still gleaming in the sun. Outside her old house, neighbors gathered to greet her, a white banner hung on the porch, "Jaycee's home." The kids from her childhood street, now parents themselves, stood holding their own children's hands, teary-eyed. Jaycee stepped out of the car, letting go of her notebook for the first time. She smiled, took a trembling breath, and whispered to herself, "I'm home." In the days that followed, Jaycee began another journey, longer, quieter. A small house on the outskirts of Placerville, California became her refuge, where she lived with her 2 daughters under the protection of police and trauma counselors. Outside the white picket fence, the media still swarmed, lenses aimed, headlines splashed across the internet: "The miracle girl, victim or warrior?" But inside, Jaycee was just an awkward young mother, clumsily brushing her daughter's hair, learning to answer to mom instead of sister, swallowing back the sudden nightmares that still struck at night. One crisp autumn morning, Jaycee sat in her therapist's office, across the table from a gentle-eyed woman. On the desk lay copies of the old curriculum pages she had written in captivity, placed beside a blank sheet of fresh white paper. "Jaycee," the therapist said softly, "you get to choose what you learn now."
No one grade you anymore.
Jaycee stared down at the blank page. Her fingers trembled as she picked up the pen, then wrote the first line. "I want to learn how to love myself." She smiled, a faint, tentative but real smile, and looked up at the ceiling, where sunlight streamed through the window warm and kind. She began rewriting her story. The opening line of her memoir read simply, "I'm still here."
And that is my greatest victory.
Jaycee took to riding her bike around the quiet neighborhood every afternoon, her long hair flowing, the sunlight lighting up her face. When someone called out, "Jaycee," she turned back, waved, and grinned. Days in Placerville passed gently. She began speaking at child advocacy groups, standing behind a podium, her voice still a little shaky.
Believe those children want to live.
And we have to fight for them. One night before bed, she opened her old notebook, the final curriculum she had ever kept. On the last blank page, she wrote a new line, this time with a strong, decisive hand. Today, I am no longer his student. I am myself. She closed the notebook, set it aside, and held her 2 sleeping daughters close. Outside the window, the Placerville sky was scattered with stars, glittering as though to welcome a new soul slowly being reborn. 1 year after coming home, Jaycee made her first public appearance before the media. The small auditorium in Sacramento was packed with reporters, bright white lights flooding the wooden podium where she stood. Behind her hung banners reading, "Hope lives here, survivors' voices matter." The room fell into an uncanny hush as Jaycee stepped out, her long brown hair falling over a simple blue dress, her hands clutching a stack of notes. She slowly placed her hand on the microphone and took a deep breath. For a moment, her eyes swept the crowd, the unfamiliar faces, the cameras trained on her, before settling on the front row, where her 2 daughters smiled back at her in quiet encouragement. Her voice trembled at first, but word by word it grew steadier. For 18 years, I learned to survive, because I thought that was all I could do. Today, I know I can live. And I want my daughters to see that their mother is not broken. Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then rising into a full, thunderous standing ovation. She published her first memoir, A Stolen Life, selling millions of copies in its first year. At book signings, long lines of people waited clutching photos of their own missing children, tears streaming as Jaycee gently held their hands and whispered, "Don't give up." She went on to establish a foundation for abduction survivors, visiting schools and conferences, speaking in her calm but resolute voice. "We are not just victims. We are still here. And being here is enough." One late night, after returning home from an event, Jaycee sat alone on the porch, looking up at the starlit Placerville sky. Next to her, her 2 daughters slept soundly on the bench. She scrolled through her phone, reading messages of thanks from strangers, parents, children, lives touched by her story. Jaycee set the phone down, wrapped her arms around her daughters, and for the first time in years, she laughed, a laugh full of something real, something happy. On the windowpane behind her, their reflections shimmered beneath the words she'd taped there just the day before. "We home. We're alive. We're enough." Years passed, and Jaycee's life grew quietly ordinary. She opened a small ranch in Placerville, a place where children who had suffered abuse or abduction could come to play, learn, and simply live among nature. A wooden sign at the gate read simply, "Just be you." Every morning, Jaycee walked the wildflower fields with her 2 daughters, sunlight catching in her brown hair, the breeze carrying the sweet scent of grass. She always carried a pad of blank paper, where she wrote her thoughts each day, but this time, no more scores, no more curriculum.
Only simple word.
Today, I smiled.
Today, I forgave myself.
Today, I loved myself more than yesterday. One afternoon, Jaycee returned to South Lake Tahoe, standing before the old bus stop, the place where it all began. The grass had grown back lush and green, the signpost gleamed with fresh paint. She laid her hand on the cool metal pole and closed her eyes. In her memory, she still heard the van's tires screech, still felt that rough hand dragging her away, the terror flooding her chest. But when she opened her eyes again, it was gone. Now there was only her, standing tall at peace, with her 2 daughters waiting behind her. She walked back to them slowly, smiling gently. The golden evening sun washed over their shoulders, stretching their shadows across the quiet street, blending with other children laughing nearby. Jaycee wrapped her arms around her daughters, took a deep breath, and whispered to herself,
"I'm not that scared little girl anymore.
I am me. And that's enough." The South Lake Tahoe sky was crystal clear at day's end.
The distant snowy peaks sparkled, blushing golden pink in the fading light, like a promise.
That those buried can still rise again. That the children stolen from their childhood can still grow and smile. That Jaycee Lee Dugard, after everything, had finally come home.